Welcome to Revenge and Justice, where betrayal finally meets its reckoning. We share powerful first-person stories of men who were underestimated, betrayed, and pushed too far by family business partners and the people they trusted most. If you believe respect must be earned and betrayal always has a price, you've found your home. And now, today's story. 800 people were inside my daughter's second wedding, and I was standing in the parking lot with my hands in my coat pockets. I owned the company that had paid for every light strung across that ceiling. I owned the rail spur that hauled in the lumber for the floor they would dance on. Nobody inside that building knew it. That was how I had arranged it 9 years earlier in a lawyer's office in Lincoln, and I had never once regretted it until that evening. I have owned 2 suits in my life. I buried my wife in the first one. I bought the second one 11 years later off a rack in Grand Island, and it had been to 4 funerals and 1 wedding. The wedding was my daughter's. It was small. It was in my own backyard, under the roses her mother planted the spring before she died, and 19 people came, and I counted them. 3 years later, I put that same suit on again and drove out to the fairgrounds east of Hastings, and I parked in the last row. I always park in the last row. A man who spends 40 years around trucks learns that the last row is where you can leave without waiting on anybody, and the habit outlasted the trucks. Mine is a flatbed model, year 1998, with the bed liner worn through to bare metal in 2 places. There is a brass grain probe lying behind the seat of that truck. It is 4 feet long and worn smooth in the middle where a hand goes. It has been behind that seat for as long as I have owned it. I did not think about it once that night. I want to be honest about that. It was behind the seat and I left it there. On the passenger side, there was a box wrapped in brown paper. I had wrapped it myself at the kitchen table, badly, with too much tape at the corners. I had been driving around with it for 9 days waiting on that Saturday. I sat with my hand flat on the top of it for a moment before I got out. Then I left it on the seat because a man does not walk into a room carrying a gift before he knows the room will have him. It was the 25th of October, and the first hard frost had come through on Thursday. The corn was off. From the last row of that lot, you could see all the way east across the stubble, and the sky had already gone the color it goes around 5:30 in that part of Nebraska. I could hear the band tuning from 400 feet away, which tells you something about how much noise 800 people make before they have even started. The walk from the last row to the front gate takes you along the east side of the property, past the row of upright bins the fairgrounds leases to the elevator in the off-season. 20 of them. Corrugated steel 60 feet to the eave, standing in a line like they were waiting on something. I slowed down when I came alongside them. I always slow down alongside a bin. 40 years of climbing steel and listening to it does something to a man's feet, and I stood there a second longer than I needed to before I went on toward the lights. I reached the gate at 20 minutes before 6. The invitation, which I had not received, said 6 o'clock. I have not been late to anything in 29 years. That is not a virtue. It is only a thing that happened to me once and then stayed. There was a young woman working the gate with a tablet in a leather folio and a headset pushed down around her neck. Her name is Paisley Keller. I did not know that then. She had the look people get when they have been standing in one spot in the cold for 2 hours and have another 4 to go. And she was being kind about it, which I noticed. I gave her my name. She smiled the way people smile when smiling is part of the job, and she swiped down the list with one finger, quickly, the way you go through something you expect to find. She got to the bottom of it. Then she stopped, and her finger stayed there on the glass a moment too long. She went back to the top and started again slower. This time, her lips moved a little while she read. She asked me how I spelled it, and I spelled it for her 1 letter at a time, the way I have spelled it at parts counters and bank windows my whole life. She asked whether it might be listed under somebody else, a guest of A+1, a table assignment. I told her it would be under Hendricks. She read it a 3rd time. Behind her, through the open doors, I could see the string lights and the white cloth on the tables and a woman in a green dress laughing with her head tipped all the way back. The band had quit tuning and started playing. Paisley Keller looked up at me, and I watched her decide how to say it, and I felt sorry for her, which is a strange thing to remember about that night. She told me my name was not on the list. She said it the way people say a thing they do not believe themselves, with her voice going up a little at the end, as though I might correct her. I asked her to check one more time. I did not raise my voice. I have never raised my voice at a young person doing a job, and I was not going to start at the gate of my own daughter's wedding. She did not check again. She turned a quarter away from me, put 2 fingers to the headset at her collar, and said a few words into it that I could not hear over the band. Then she stood there holding the tablet against her chest with both arms, the way you hold something when you have run out of things to do with your hands. We waited like that for a little over 2 minutes. I know because I looked at my watch, and I have worn the same watch since 1984. The doors opened, and the music came out into the cold all at once loud, and then they shut and it went small again. My son-in-law came down the 3 steps to the gravel. He had on a tuxedo that fit him the way clothes fit a man who has them fitted. He was 34 years old that fall. He stopped beside a parked car on his way over and turned his head to see himself in the glass, and he fixed something about his hair that did not need fixing. He was wearing driving gloves, thin black leather, the kind with the little holes across the knuckles. He wore them in October, and he wore them in June, and in 3 years I had never once seen his bare hands touch anything on that property, not a rail, not a door, not a handful of corn. He did not take them off to talk to me. I noticed that. And then I put it away with the other things I had noticed and not said. He told Paisley Keller she could go take her break. She looked at him and then at me, and then she went, and on her way past she said she was sorry, and she said it low to me and not to him. That is the last kind thing anybody said to me for 11 days, and I have thought about it more than I expected to. Then he explained the evening to me. He was patient about it. He said there were people inside from Omaha and Sioux Falls people with Capitol people who had flown in, and that the photographs from the night were going to be used. He said the word used twice. He said a room like that one has a certain expectation about it, and that he had spent 2 years building toward a room like that one, and he did not think I understood what a room like that one was worth. I asked him where Lila was. He said she was busy. I asked him whether she knew I had come. He looked back at the doors for a second, and then he told me that tonight was not about that. Then he reached inside his jacket. He did it slowly, the way a man does when he wants you to watch him do it, and he brought out a white envelope with nothing written on the front. He held it up between 2 gloved fingers for a moment before he put it into my hand, and I understood that the pause was part of it, that he had thought about the pause beforehand. I opened it standing there. It was a cashier's check drawn on a bank in Kearney, $25,000. The date in the corner was 9 days old. I had been driving around with that box on my passenger seat for 9 days. He said it was for me. He said it was not an insult, that I should not take it as one, that it was simply the cleanest way to handle a difficult situation, and that a man my age ought to have something set aside. Then he looked at me and said the only sentence out of that whole evening I can still hear in his voice exactly the way he said it. She's chosen a new family. I looked at the check for a while. $25,000. I had spent more than that on a used grain leg in 1991 and had not thought twice. I stood in that gravel lot in a suit I had bought off a rack, and I held in my hand a number that a man believed was large enough to buy a father. And behind him, the string lights were going, and the band was playing something with a fiddle in it. Then I folded the check once, straight down the middle, and put it in my shirt pocket. I thanked him. I do not know what he had braced himself for. Shouting, maybe? A scene at the gate with people close enough to hear? Whatever it was, it did not come, and I watched him try to find the shape of what had just happened, and fail to find it. He stood there another second. Then he told me to drive safe, and he went back up the 3 steps, and the doors took the music in with him. I walked back the way I had come, along the east side past the 20 steel bins standing in their line. I did not slow down. That is the only part of that night I would do differently. And I have had a long time to think about it. I got in the truck. and I sat with the key in my hand and the box in brown paper still there on the seat beside me. The windshield went over with frost while I sat. I could hear the band from where I was, thin and far off, and then the wind turned, and I could not. After a while, I put my hand flat on the top of the box the way I had before. Then I started the engine, and I backed out of the last row, and I turned left at the county road, which is not the way home. The county road east out of the fairgrounds runs 11 miles before it meets Highway 6, and there is nothing along it in late October but stubble and telephone poles. I drove it at 50. I had the heater on and the radio off. I did not go home because home was 9 miles the other direction, and there was nothing at home I wanted that night except the notebook, and the notebook was in my coat pocket, where it always is. There is a pay telephone bolted to the block wall of the filling station at the crossroads. It has been there longer than the filling station has had that owner. Most people would tell you the thing does not work anymore. It works. I have carried a cellular telephone since 2004, and I have never once said anything on it that I would not have been willing to have read aloud in a courtroom. I put in the coins and dialed a number I have known for 31 years. Shepard Chung answered on the second ring at 10 minutes past 8 on a Saturday night. He did not say hello. He did not ask what was wrong, and he did not ask how the wedding had been, which he knew about because he knows my calendar better than I do. He asked me one thing. He asked how long I had. I told him I wanted a forensic audit, all of it. Every elevator, every siding, every warehouse, receipt Rosas Grain and Rail had issued in the last 3 years, done by people who had never eaten lunch in our building. He asked me what I was looking for. I told him the truth, which was that I did not know yet, and that I would know it when somebody tried to keep me from finding it. He was quiet for a second. Then he said he would have a team by Monday, and he hung up without saying goodbye, which is one of about 4 things I have always liked about him. I drove home with the box still on the seat. The frost came back twice, and I ran the defroster twice, and by the time I turned into my own drive it was going on 9 o'clock. I did not go in the house. I went around the side and sat down on the back steps in that suit with my elbows on my knees, and I looked at the yard. My wife planted 11 rose bushes along the south fence in April of the year she died. She did it in one afternoon while I was in Grand Island buying a used auger. She had the holes dug and the bone meal in before I got back, and she was sitting right where I was sitting, filthy to the elbows, drinking a glass of water and looking at what she had done. She told me it was the only place in the yard with light all day, and nobody could talk her out of it. Her name was Amelia. Her people came out of the packing plant and had nothing, and she was the most stubborn person I have ever been in a room with. The bushes are 29 years old now. In late October, they are nothing but canes and thorns and a few brown hips the birds have not gotten to, and you would not know by looking at them that anything was ever alive in there. But they come back. They have come back every single April without one thing being asked of them, and I have never taken any credit for it. I sat out there long enough for the cold to get through the suit. I thought about the way that young woman had held the tablet against her chest. I thought about the fact that a cashier's check takes a day or 2 to draw, and that the date on this one was 9 days back, and that 9 days back, I had been at the kitchen table with brown paper and too much tape. 29 years ago, I was in the sleeper of a truck outside Ogallala when the call came in, and I did not hear it because I had run 14 hours and I had the phone under a jacket. When I did hear it, it was 9 hours later. I drove the 400 miles back with the sun coming up the whole way. I have not been late to anything since. That is the entire story, and I am not going to tell it better than that. Eventually, I got up and went inside and put the kettle on and did not make anything with it. I took the check out of my shirt pocket. I did not tear it up. A man who tears up a piece of paper like that is telling himself a story about the kind of man he is, and I already knew what kind of man I was. I opened the notebook, put the check inside the back cover, behind the elastic, and left it there, the way you leave anything you intend to account for later. Then I took out the carpenter's pencil and wrote 2 lines on a clean page. The first line was the date. The second line was a question, and the question was why a man pays $25,000 to keep you out of a building he has already made sure you cannot get into. The telephone rang at 4 in the morning. I was awake. Shepard had not gone to bed at all, and he did not apologize for the hour. And there was something in his voice I had heard maybe 3 times in 31 years. He told me he had not waited for Monday. He told me he had pulled the last 4 quarterly reports himself. And he told me there was something in those books a man did not need an auditor to see. Mila Coffee unlocks her front door at 4:30 in the morning and has been doing it since before I owned anything worth the name. I was on the second stool from the register when she came around with the pot. She did not ask me what I wanted. She has not asked me what I wanted since the Reagan administration. She poured, and she set the cup down, and she rang it up at $1 the way she has always rung it up, and we both know what that costs her, and neither of us has ever said so. Her place sits on 2nd Street between a tire shop and a lot full of anhydrous tanks. At that hour, it fills up with the men who move things for a living, truck drivers on their first cup, elevator men in insulated coveralls with the hoods pushed back. Nobody in there has ever asked me a single question about money, which is one of the reasons I have kept going for 30 years. Mila is 66 and has a wrist that has been broken twice and set once. She misses nothing at all, and she has never in her life pretended otherwise. That morning she took one look at me and stopped with the pot still in her hand. I was still in the suit. I had not been to bed. It was 4:30 on a Sunday, and I was sitting at her counter in the only good clothes I own, and she did not say anything about the wedding because she already knew, because everybody on that side of the county already knew. She wiped down the counter in front of me twice. Then she asked me whether I was going after the truth or going after a reason. I did not answer her. I have been asked harder questions by lawyers and by bankers and by a federal examiner in 1996, and I answered all of those. I sat there and looked at a cup of coffee and let a 66-year-old woman with a dish rag get further into me than any of them had. She let it go. She went down the counter and started somebody else's eggs. But she had put it in the room, and it stayed in the room, and it is still in the room as far as I am concerned. Shepard had a team in a rented conference room in Lincoln by Monday noon. He had leased 2 floors of a building that had nothing to do with us and put people in it who had never set foot in one of my elevators. The woman running it was named Rivka Melton. She was 44 years old. She had done 9 years of agricultural fraud work for a bank in Kansas City, and she did not shake my hand when I came in because she was already reading. There was a young man on her team who wanted to explain the discrepancy away. He was not lazy and he was not crooked. He simply wanted the numbers to be the kind of problem he had seen before. He said it was a reconciliation lag. He said receipts get written against grain in transit, that the carryover from a big harvest always looks ugly on paper in October, and that the gap would close when the country elevators reported. Rivka let him finish. Then she asked him what our licensed capacity was. He looked it up and said 11.4 million bushels across 34 locations. She asked him what the outstanding warehouse receipts came to. He looked that up, and it took him longer, and then he said 13.7 million bushels. She asked him what he would like her to do with the 2.3 million bushels of corn that existed on paper and did not exist anywhere in the state of Nebraska. He did not have anything to say to that. Nobody did. I want to be plain about what that number meant to me sitting in that room. A warehouse receipt is a piece of paper that says a farmer's grain is in my bin. He borrows against it. His banker takes it as collateral. It is a promise with a number on it. I put up 2 of those 34 locations with my own hands and my own back, and I know what 11.4 million bushels looks like because I have stood on top of most of it. So I did not do what the room expected me to do, which was ask for more spreadsheets. A spreadsheet is somebody's opinion typed neatly. I went out to the hallway and called Danny Connor. Danny has been my superintendent at the Juniata House for 30 years. He came to me at 28 with a bad back and a wife expecting, and he has forgotten more about how a steel bin behaves in a wet fall than most engineers ever learn. I asked him a simple thing. I asked him to walk the East Row at Juniata and tell me if anything felt wrong to him. There was a pause on that line. It was not long, it was maybe 2 seconds. But I have talked to that man on the telephone probably 4,000 times, and in 30 years, I had never once heard him take 2 seconds to answer a question about his own bins. He said he would look at it. He said it in a voice he does not use with me. Then he said he had to get his boy off to school, which was not true because Danny's boy is 31 years old and lives in Colorado, and Danny Connor has never told me a lie in his life. The message came in at 10 minutes after 5 the next morning, while it was still dark. 3 words. Check bin 14. It is 19 miles from my drive to the Juniata house, and I made it in 22 minutes on a road with frost heave in it. The dash said 4 below. There was no light in the sky yet, and the only thing you could see from a mile out was the red beacon on top of the leg and the shape of the East Row standing against nothing. The Juniata house is the second facility I ever built, and the first one I built with money instead of credit. There are 20 upright bins in the East Row. The first 6 are smaller, and the welds are uglier. The last 4 went up the year Lila started school. In the dark, they do not look like storage. They look like something that was left there. Danny was already parked at the end of the row with his headlights off. That is the part I noticed first. A man who is going to meet his boss at 5 in the morning to look at a bin leaves his lights on because he has nothing to be quiet about. Danny had shut his off and was sitting in the dark in a running truck with the heater going. He got out when I pulled in. He had not slept either. He is 58 and carries himself like a man managing something in his lower back, and he had his coveralls on over what was clearly yesterday's shirt. He did not say good morning. He held up the keyring and worked through it looking for the one that opens the ground-level access on 14, and he went past it twice. His hands were not steady. Danny Connor has hands like a set of pliers, and I have watched him change a head pulley in a sleet storm without a word. But he dropped the ring in the gravel once, and he stood back up slower than the drop required, and I did not say anything about it, and neither did he. There is a way to read a bin without opening it, and no instrument has ever replaced it. You go along the wall with your knuckles or a short piece of pipe, and you strike the sheet every couple of feet working up, and you listen. Full steel comes back short and dead, like knocking on a table. Empty steel rings. It goes on ringing after your hand is gone. The place where the sound changes is where the grain stops. Danny had a foot of half-inch pipe in his coat. He started low and worked up, and he called it out as he went the way you do when somebody is standing behind you. Dead, dead, dead. He was moving at a steady pace, 3 feet at a time, and the sound was exactly what it should have been for corn in the last week of October. Then he hit a course at about the height of my chest, and the note came back wrong. It rang. It rang like a barrel. He went up another 2 feet, and it rang louder, and he went up another 2, and it was singing, and he stopped and stood there with the pipe hanging down at his side and did not go any higher. From the ground to the height of a man's chest, that bin was corn. Above that line, it was air. A bin that size in that week of that year should have been within 4 feet of the roof. I asked him to do it again. He did it again. It came out the same. I put my own hand on the sheet and struck it myself in 3 places low at the line and above the line, and I got the same 3 answers he got, which is not a thing I doubted, but I have never in my life taken another man's word about steel when I could touch it. We stood there a minute. The frost was coming out of both of us in the headlight beam. Then I asked him how long he had known. He said 8 months. He said it in one breath like a thing he had been carrying up a staircase. He said he first heard it in the last week of February, when he was walking the row after a wind event, and he told himself what any of us would tell ourselves, which is that grain bridges and settles and hangs up on the wall and gives you a false read. He said he came back in April and it was worse. He said he came back in June and stopped coming back. I did not ask him why he never called me. A lot of men would have asked, and asking would have felt like the right thing to do, and it would have been the cheapest thing I did all year. Danny Connor is 14 months from 30 years, and 30 years is when his pension vests, and he has a wife with a condition and a boy in Colorado he flies out to see twice a year. I have known that arithmetic my whole life. There was a stretch of about 4 years when I ran the road instead of coming home, because the arithmetic said 2, and every single one of those years was the right business decision, and I have not gotten one of them back. So I did not ask. I told him to go sit in his truck and get warm. Then I walked back to the flatbed and reached in behind the seat and took hold of the brass probe for the first time since I had left it there, and it was so cold it burned, and I went across the gravel to the base of the ladder. The rungs had frost on them, 1/8 of an inch thick. I put my boot on the first one and started up. 60 feet is not a long climb when you are 30. I stopped twice going up that ladder, once at the third rest and once 4 rungs from the top, and both times I hung there with my forehead against the cold rail until my chest quit. I have a cough that comes on in the winter and has come on every winter for 15 years. It is grain dust. Every man who has spent his life in this business has some version of it, and none of us discuss it, and I have never once mentioned it to my daughter. The wind at the top of a bin in a flat country does not gust. It just runs steady all one direction, and it is a different wind than the one on the ground. I came off the ladder onto the roof deck and got hold of the rail and stood there a second with the whole county black underneath me and one string of yard lights way off toward Hastings. The manhole cover on 14 was frozen down. I put my boot on the edge and rocked it twice and it came loose with a crack, and I swung it back on its hinge. Then I got down on my knees at the opening with the flashlight. You have to understand what I expected to see. A full bin in the last week of October is grain right there under you. The surface comes up nearly to the roof, peaked in the middle where the spout has been throwing, and when you open the hatch, it is close enough that the dust off it comes up in your face and you turn your head. That is what a full bin does. It breathes at you. Nothing came up out of that hole at all. I put the probe in. 4 feet of brass, and you can find the grain in a full bin with it without leaning, just by reaching down through the hatch, and I have done that 10,000 times, and I did not have to think about how. The probe went down its whole length and swung. There was nothing on the end of it. I moved it in a circle, and it swung through empty air in every direction. So I lay down on the deck plate in the dark, with the wind coming across me, and put my arm in past the shoulder and moved it around, which is not a sensible thing for a 68-year-old man to do at the top of a bin, and I did it anyway. My hand did not find anything either. Danny had a weighted tape in his truck, and he sent it up to me on the hoist line. I dropped the plumb through the hatch and let it run, and let it run, and let it run. And I stood there in the wind on top of my own bin paying out tape like a man sounding a well. When it stopped, I brought the light down onto the mark. 55 feet and 4 inches of air. It should have been 4 feet. I did not do anything for a minute. What I felt standing on that roof was not surprise, it was recognition. It was the feeling you get walking into a shop where somebody has moved every tool 3 inches from where you left it, and you cannot say yet what has been taken, but you know for certain you are not the only one who has been in there. I went back down the ladder slower than I went up it. At the bottom, Danny had the ground-level access door standing open, and inside in the beam of his light there was corn. 4 or 5 feet of it up against the door, exactly the depth a man's knock had said it was. It looked like grain. It looked like grain to anybody who walked up, put his head in, saw a wall of yellow, and walked away satisfied. I ran the probe into it and pulled the core and turned the tube out into my hand. It was not corn. It was fines and screenings and busted hulls and red dog and dirt with maybe one whole kernel in 100, the kind of sweepings that come off a cleaner and go into a fill for pond edges and cattle mats. Somebody had taken the trash out of 34 elevators and laid it across the floor of that bin 4 feet deep so that the door would tell a lie for them. I pulled a second core 2 feet over to be sure. It came out the same, and it was still warm in the middle because trash like that heats when it sits, and no farmer's corn was ever going to be in that building again. I did not say one word to Danny. He did not ask me for one. He shut the door and put the pin back through the latch, and he stood there with the light down at his side while I knocked the tube out against my boot heel and wiped it on my coat. Then I walked out to the end of the row where the gravel turns, and I turned around and looked back down it. 20 bins. Corrugated steel gray against a sky that had just started to go gray itself, all of them standing there quiet, with the frost on them and the beacon turning slow on the leg. I had walked that row on foot more times than I could put a number to. I had climbed almost every one of them. There were 4 at the far end I put up the year my daughter started school, and I had stood at the base of them with the concrete still wet and thought a thing that I am not going to repeat because it turned out not to be true. 19 more to check. It is 91 miles from Juniata to that building in Lincoln, and I did not stop for anything. I still had the cores in a paper sack on the seat beside me, and the smell of hot screenings came up out of it the whole way, which is a sour smell, closer to a compost pile than to a crop. They had the curtains pulled in that conference room at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That is a small thing, and it told me more about where we were than anything anybody said. You draw the blinds in a leased room on the 14th floor of a building nobody knows you are in because somebody on your own payroll might look up from the sidewalk. Rivka Melton had put us in a room where we were hiding from our own company. She did not say we had a problem. She turned the monitor around to face me. It was not a summary. It was the register itself. The running list of every outstanding warehouse receipt Rosas Grain and Rail had issued and not yet redeemed, sorted by date, and it went on down the screen, past where the screen stopped, bushels in one column, a name in another. I put the paper sack on the table and turned it out onto a clean sheet and told them what 14 was. I told them 55 feet and 4 inches of air. I told them about the 4 feet of sweepings laid up against the door so the door would tell a lie. A room like that gets very quiet when the work stops being about numbers. Rivka picked up a few of the fines and rolled them between her fingers and put them down, and after that she stopped talking to me the way you talk to a client. Shepard laid the law out in about 4 sentences, the way he does. A grain warehouse in this state runs on a license. The Public Service Commission holds it. If a licensee reports a shortage of that size, or if anybody else reports it for him, the commission does not investigate for 6 months while everyone stays open. It suspends. It moves fast, and it moves inside 24 hours, and it moves on all 34 locations at once because the license is one license. I asked him to say the rest of it out loud. He did. 24 hours from the report, every scale house I own goes dark. The pits get padlocked. It is the 28th of October, and there are men who still have 500 acres standing, and the elevator is closed, and their trucks sit in a line at a gate that is not going to open. Their notes come due in January, whether the corn moves or not. And the ones who already hauled the ones whose grain is honestly in my honest bins, they cannot get it out either, because a suspended license does not sort the innocent from the rest. It just stops. While he was talking, the screen kept adding lines. It was 1 o'clock on a Tuesday in the last week of the harvest, and out there at 34 scale houses, the tickets were still being written. Every 11 or 12 minutes, another one came up on that monitor and pushed the whole list down by a row. Somebody was backing a truck onto a pit that hour and taking a piece of paper in exchange for his year, and the paper was worth what my name was worth, and my name was not worth anything anymore, and he did not know that yet. I asked Rivka to print the register. She told me it would run 400 and some pages. I told her to print it. It took the machine in that room 11 minutes, and I stood there the whole time and picked the pages up as they came. I knew the names. That is the part I have never been able to explain to anybody who did not grow up in a county like mine. Wendell Boma, who bought his father out in 2009 and has been 3 payments behind since. The Kasbauer brothers, who do not speak to each other and farm the same section. A widow west of Roseland whose husband hauled to me for 22 years and who has kept hauling to me since he died because she said he would have. I stood at that printer and read names the way other men read a hometown paper. When I got to the end of it, there were 3,206 of them. So there it was. If I reported it that afternoon, 34 gates closed in the morning, and 3,206 people paid for a crime none of them committed. If I did not report it, then every hour I stayed quiet was an hour somebody could write another receipt against corn that was not there, and I would be the man who knew and let it run, and that is not a distinction the law makes, and it is not one I would have made either. I went over and opened the curtain. It was a gray afternoon, and there was nothing to see out of that window but the top of a parking structure and a water tower, and I stood there anyway with my hand on the pull cord for longer than a man ought to need. Then I turned around and told Shepard we were not reporting it yet. He did not argue with me. He is not built to argue with me, and he never has been. He asked me one question. He asked how long I intended to sit on it. I put the 400 pages under my arm, and I did not answer him, and I have thought about that room every day since. It took 3 days to walk the rest of the row, and we did it the way you would rob a place rather than the way you would inspect one. Danny and I went out at 4 in the morning and used one light between us. Of the 20 bins in that row, 11 were short. 4 were empty to the floor with a lid of screenings laid over them, the same as 14. The other 9 were honest, full, dead-to-the-knuckle farmer's corn sitting exactly where the paper said it was, and I could not take any comfort from that at all. On Friday, I drove back to the fairgrounds. They had it stripped by then. The doors were chalked open, and the heat was off, and the hall smelled like a building nobody is using. 800 folding chairs were stacked on carts against the north wall in blocks of 10. The string lights were down and coiled into plastic tubs with the cords fed through the handles, which is the kind of thing that tells you a person is good at their job. Somebody had already been over the floor twice. There was nothing left in there to say what had happened in that room a week ago. I went back outside to do what I had come to do. I started at the last row, at the exact space I had parked in, and I walked to the front gate counting paces. I have counted my whole life. I count paces off a field edge. I count rows on a bin ladder. I count seconds on a leg before I trust it. It is not a discipline. It is closer to a tick, and my wife used to catch me at it in church. 211 paces from the truck to the gate. The middle third of that walk runs along a 4-strand fence, and on the other side of that fence is the north end of the Juniata house. The county bought that ground for a fairgrounds in 1951, and my company came in against the fence line 30-some years later, which is a thing everybody out there knows, and nobody thinks about the way you do not think about the fact that your kitchen shares a wall with your bathroom. I got the tape out of the truck and measured from the middle of that walkway to the base of the third bin past the corner post. It is 62 feet. 20 steps off the path a man takes to get to the front gate of the Adams County Fairgrounds, there is a bin with 55 feet of air in it and 4 feet of sweepings laid across the floor. And that bin is number 14, and my name is on the sheet metal 3 bins down from it. I want to be careful here because this is the part I got wrong for a week. I had thought I was kept out of that building because of what I had on. I thought it was the suit or the truck, or the fact that I do not look like money and never have, and I had made my peace with that the way you make peace with weather. Standing at that fence with a tape measure in my hand, I understood that my coat had nothing to do with anything. There is not another man alive who can walk that stretch of fence line and know. Danny can, and Danny had already been broken to it. Beyond the two of us, there is nobody. Put any other man on that path and he sees 20 gray bins. Put me on it, and I am 62 feet from steel I helped stand up in a suit with 20 minutes and nothing to do. I do not carry a probe to a wedding, but I would have laid my hand on that sheet. I did slow down. I stood there a second longer than I needed to, and then I made myself go on toward the lights. And the only reason this story is not 8 days shorter is that I was in a hurry to be let in somewhere. And a cashier's check takes a day to draw, and that one was dated 9 days out. Nobody decides to buy a man off in the middle of a party. That check was written before the flowers were ordered. I was standing there with the tape still out when a car came up the drive and parked by the hall, and Paisley Keller got out with a clipboard to do the walkthrough on the building. She saw me and stopped for a second the way you do when you are somewhere alone with a person you owe something to and cannot pay. She came over anyway, which I thought was decent. She said she had thought about it all week. She said the whole thing had sat wrong with her. Then she said something she clearly had not planned to say. In 11 years of doing weddings, she had never once had a father turned away at a gate. And she had not known what the rule was for it. I asked her, since we were being plain with each other, whether my name had ever been on the list at all. She looked at the clipboard instead of at me and said that it had. She said the file was revised at 4:50 on the day of the event, 10 minutes before she took her position at the gate, and that one line had been deleted. Not left off, deleted out of a list that had been closed for 2 weeks. I asked her whether it was the groom who asked for that. She said no. She said she had assumed so herself, and she had gone back and looked because it had bothered her, and the request had not come from him. I was not in that kitchen. I need to say that plainly because everything in this part came to me secondhand from my daughter at my own table a long while after. I am telling it the way she told it, and where she stopped and looked at her hands, I have left it stopped. There are 2 or 3 places in it where I am fairly sure she gave me the shorter version. They live in a house on the north side of Hastings that was built 4 years ago and looks it. Everything in it matches, and there is not one thing in that whole house that anybody's grandmother ever owned. Lila has a coat closet by the back door with her coveralls and her steel toes and a canvas bag of grading gear in it, and that closet is the only square yard of the place that is hers. He came in a little after 7 on a Tuesday with a folder under his arm, and he did not come in alone. There was a woman with him named Alondra Mays. Lila had met her twice at company functions. She is 41, she wears gray, and she has a habit I have since watched for myself, which is that she sets her pen down flat on the table before she says anything that matters. She had no reason to be in my daughter's kitchen at 7 o'clock at night. He did not take his gloves off. Lila told me that part twice, once at the beginning and once at the end, and I do not think she noticed she had done it. The folder had a marital authorization in it. When Amelia died, there was a small policy through the packing plant, $11,000, and I put every cent of it into the company in her name and issued the stock to our daughter. Lila has known since she was 19 that she owns a piece of paper with her mother's name on the front of it. She has always believed it was worth about what the policy was worth. She keeps it in a bank box in Juniata and has looked at it maybe 4 times in her life. What he wanted was her signature giving him authority to vote and pledge it. He explained it as a refinancing. The bank wanted every share in the family voted the same way. It was a formality, it would be reversed inside 90 days. And everyone else had signed the same document weeks ago. Then my daughter asked him a question about the third quarter report. Lila is a licensed grader. She has been on the pit at the Juniata house since she was 22. She reads every quarterly the company puts out because it is her own scale, tickets adding up in there. And 8 weeks earlier she had noticed that the receipted bushels and her own inbound tickets were not walking together. She did not ask him anything about stock. She asked him why the carry-in at Juniata was reported 11% over what her own house had weighed. He did not answer her. He looked at Alondra Mays, and Alondra Mays picked her pen up, and then she set it down flat on the table, and then she answered the question. She answered it well. She used the words position reconciliation, and she was smooth about it, and she was speaking for the chief executive officer of a grain company about the physical contents of a bin in front of a woman who has stood on the pit and watched that grain go in. That was the moment my daughter said. Not the folder, not the gloves, the lawyer knowing the number and her husband not knowing it. She told him she wanted to read it first. She said it in the mildest way she knows how to say anything, and she set the folder to one side of the island and put her hand flat on top of it, and she said she would look at it over the weekend. He was quiet for a second, and then he called her a liability. He said her holding it up was going to cost him a window. He said other things after that which she did not repeat to me, and which I have chosen not to press her on. In 3 years, neither of us had heard him raise his voice at her. Alondra Mays put her things in her bag while he was still talking, and stood by the door and looked at nothing, and to this day I do not know whether that was tact or bookkeeping. They left a little before 8 and took the folder with them. Lila stood in that kitchen with all the overhead lights on. Then she went to the coat closet by the back door and got the canvas bag with her grading gear and took out an envelope from the bottom of it, and in the envelope were 41 photocopied scale tickets she had been quietly running off the machine at her own house since the first week of September, 2 at a time, on days when nobody was watching the copier. She had not shown them to anybody. She had not written down what she thought they meant. She spread them out on the island and looked at them a while. Then she picked up her phone and scrolled to my name. She sat there with her thumb over it. 3 days earlier, I had been standing at a fence with a tape measure 62 feet from a bin she was about to spend the whole winter thinking about, and neither of us knew the other one was already in it. She did not call. She put the phone face down on the counter, and she gathered the tickets back into the envelope, and she went to bed with every light in the house still burning. For 9 days, Rivka Melton's people did not look at the bins at all. They looked at where the money went, which is a different animal. A man who steals 2.3 million bushels does not have them sitting in a shed somewhere. He has turned it into paper, and the paper has gone somewhere, and the somewhere is the only part of it that will ever tell you why. The corn had been sold. That was the first thing. Sold out the back door in ordinary loads over 18 months at market to real buyers who did nothing wrong, and the proceeds ran through the company the way any proceeds do. But the receipts against that grain were never retired. They stayed alive on the register, they went to the banks as collateral, and the banks lent against them. So the company had the corn money and the loan money both, and neither one had gone into a single roof or a single leg or a single dollar of anybody's wages, and Rivka wanted to know where it had gone. It had gone to buy the company's own debt. She put it up on the screen the way she puts everything up, without any preface. Over 14 months, in 11 separate transactions, somebody had been going to our lenders and quietly buying our paper off them at a discount. The revolver, the equipment notes, the mortgage on the Lincoln office, always through an intermediary, always at a price the bank was glad to take because agricultural credit had turned. I understood the shape of it before she finished. You do not do that to make money on the interest. You do that because you intend for the borrower to fail, and you want to be the one holding the note when he does. When a licensed warehouse goes down in this state, the receipts get settled out of the indemnity fund, and the bins get sold, and the man who owns the debt stands first in line and buys 34 elevators and 162 miles of track for about 11 cents on the dollar. It is not a robbery. It is a foreclosure that somebody arranged the conditions for. The buyer was a limited liability company registered in this state in good standing, current on its filings. Little Blue Holdings. I read that name 3 times. It did not do anything to me at all. It sounded like every third entity in agriculture, a name a lawyer picks off a map so it sounds local and means nothing. Rivka opened the filing and turned the screen. Sole member and manager, Shane Reeves. I want to tell you that something went through me and nothing did. I sat there with my hands on the table and read it, and it was a stranger's name. It took me somewhere between 4 and 5 seconds, which I know because Shepard afterward described watching it happen to my face. And then the second word came apart from the first one, and I understood that I was looking at my son-in-law's father. I have met that man twice. Once at an engagement dinner in Kearney, where I shook his hand, and he said something pleasant about the weather. Once at the small wedding in my own backyard, where he stood off by the fence for most of it, with a corn cob in his hand that he had picked up off the ground, shelling it with his thumb and dropping the kernels one at a time. And I remember thinking, that was a farmer's habit, and thinking nothing else about it. He talks so quietly that you lean in. That is all I had. 3 years and my entire holding on the man was a handshake, a thumb, and a low voice. I did not know what he did for a living. I had never asked, and it had never come up. Nico had said consulting once, and I had let that go by the way you let a great many things go by at a table where you are already the wrong kind of guest. Then I said the name of the company out loud, and Rivka Melton, who is from Kansas City, waited for me to explain it. The Little Blue is a river. It comes down out of Adams County and runs southeast through Thayer and Jefferson and crosses into Kansas below Hebron, and the ground along it is some of the best dryland corn in the state. I have driven that valley 300 times. I could tell you where the road bends at the Endicott Bridge. And there was an elevator company down in there, an old one-family thing, 4 or 5 houses on the branch line, and I could not for the life of me pull up the name. Shepard could. He had not said one word in 6 or 7 minutes. He was sitting at the far end with his hands flat on the table, and when I looked over at him, he did not look back at me. He said it was called Reeves Grain Company. He said there had been 9 of them, not 4 or 5. 9 elevators on the Little Blue going back to a man's grandfather, and they had gone under about 11 years ago. Then Shepard Chung stood up out of his chair and walked the length of that room to the file cabinet by the door, and he opened the second drawer, and he stood there with his back to all of us for a long time. Longer than it takes to find a folder. Long enough that Rivka stopped typing, and the young man beside her looked up. Nobody in that room said anything. I sat and watched the back of a man I have trusted with everything I own for 31 years, and I waited for him to turn around. What he brought back to the table was not something Rivka's people had generated. It was an expanding file with a rubber flap gone the color those go when they sit in a drawer for a decade. There was a date written across the flap in Shepard's hand. He put it down in front of me, sat back down, did not open it, and told me to. Inside was a haulage agreement between Rosas Grain and Rail and the short line that runs south out of Hastings. 40-some pages, exhibits, a rate schedule in the back with the tariff bands laid out in a table, and a term of 15 years and the word exclusive in about 9 places. I did not remember it. I want that understood before anything else. I read the first 4 pages the way you read a document somebody has handed you, and it was not familiar to me in any part. There were seasons I signed 4 and 5 a week and never carried one of them home in my head. Then I turned to the execution page, and it took me a second longer than it should have to know the name on it was mine. I signed 2 ways. There is the one I use when a thing matters, which has all the letters in it. And there is the other one, which is what happens when somebody is standing beside me with more paper and the truck is running outside. The name on that page was the second one. The date beside it was the 22nd of August. I know what I was doing that week without having to look it up. That Friday, I drove my daughter 4 hours east and carried 2 plastic totes and a fan up 3 flights of stairs in a dormitory in Lincoln, and she was embarrassed of me for about 90 minutes, and then she was not, and we ate at a place on O Street, and she let me pay. I could not tell you one syllable of what was in that agreement. I could tell you what she ordered. Here is what I put my name to. The short line had 1 line and 2 shippers on it. In exchange for a volume guarantee out of my houses, the railroad gave me a rate nobody else on that branch could be offered, and the schedule was written so that anybody shipping under a certain annual tonnage paid about double per car. That was the whole trick, and it is a common one. It is not illegal, nobody hid it. It went in a file, and I never thought about it again. And it moved corn cheaper for 3,000 farmers who hauled to me, and I have never once pretended that is not also true. The last exhibit was a list. It was there because the railroad had to certify existing volume commitments on the branch, and it named the other shipper house by house. 9 of them. Ruskin, Byron, Hubble, Endicott, Alexandria. Names I have driven past my whole life. 3 things landed on me at that table, and I could not put them in order. The first was that I had been going after the wrong man for 2 weeks. Nico Reeves is 34 years old and cannot answer a question about a bin in his own kitchen. Nico Reeves does not buy bank paper in 11 tranches over 14 months. Nico Reeves is not the one who thought of any of this, and he never was. The second was worse, and it worked backward instead of forward. 4 years ago, my daughter met a young man at a grain show in Lincoln. He came up to her at a booth and asked her something about moisture testing, which she thought was charming, and she told me that story, and I laughed at it. I sat in that conference room and took 3 years apart and put them back together with a different set of instructions, and every single piece still fit, and that is a thing I would not wish on anybody. The third one I said out loud because it was the only way to get it out of me. The day before, I had understood what Little Blue was doing faster than anybody else in that room, and I had said it was not a robbery. I had said it was a foreclosure that somebody arranged the conditions for. Sitting there with my own signature under my thumb, I understood I had not recognized that maneuver from across a table. I had recognized it because I had done it. Mine took 11 years to come back. That is the only difference between us, and it is a difference in timing. I asked Shepard when he had known. He said he had wondered on the third day when Rivka pulled the branch tariffs and he saw the short line's name come up in a place it had no business being. He said he had told himself he was wrong. He said he had gone home 2 nights and come back and worked and said nothing, and that the second night he got as far as the telephone. I asked him why he had not told me the minute he wondered. He did not do what I expected, which was apologize. He said he had drawn that agreement himself. He said the exclusivity language on page 11 was his, not the railroad's, that he had put it in because I asked him to protect the volume, and that was the strongest way to do it, and that he had never once in 11 years opened the exhibit at the back and read the list. Nobody said anything for a while. Somebody's screen went dark. Out the window it had started snowing the first of that year, the small, dry kind that does not stick to anything and only shows up where it crosses the light. I drove the 91 miles home and did not go in the house. There was a light on over the kitchen sink that I leave on, and I sat in the truck in my own drive and looked at it for a while. And then I went around and opened the garage instead. My garage is a 2-stall with a bench down the whole north wall that I built out of 2x10s in 1989. There is a drill press my father bought used. There is a coffee can of bolts sorted by nothing. There is a hanging fluorescent over the bench that takes a minute to come all the way on in the cold, and while it does, it buzzes and the light goes green, and I have stood under that light more hours of my life than I have sat in any office I ever paid for. I put the brass probe in the vise and got out a stone and started honing the taper. There is no reason on this earth to hone a grain probe. It is not a knife. The edge only has to part loose corn, and mine was worn exactly the way 40 years wears a thing, and any man who knows the tool would tell you it was right. I put a stone on it anyway. I worked the taper from the heel out, 200 strokes, then turned it in the vise and did the other side, and then I did it again. And it was 3 in the morning, and then it was 20 after 4. The cough came on about an hour in. It does that when I get cold and then warm. It comes in a run of 4 or 5, and then it is over. And this time it was not over, and I had to put both hands on the front edge of that bench and stand there and wait it out with my eyes shut. When it quit, I spat in the shop sink and ran the water and did not look, and I went back to the vise. I have not told my daughter about the cough. I did not tell her that year, and I have not told her since. She would want me to go and see somebody, and I would go, and then there would be a thing between us with a name on it, and there is going to be a name on it soon enough without my help. I was not thinking about my wife, and I was not thinking about 9 elevators. I was building a plan the way you build one piece at a time, with your hands busy so your head will hold still. By the time the sky started, I had the whole thing. Shepard came out at 8, and I gave it to him standing in the driveway with the door up and the light still on behind me. Lift the veil on the trust, put my name back on the register, and take the company off the board in one motion. Go to every lender Little Blue had bought from and buy the paperback over the top of him at whatever it cost. Hand Nico Reeves to a federal grand jury with a bow on him, and do all of it where people could watch in front of the men whose good opinion Shane Reeves had spent 11 years buying. Shepard heard the whole thing out. He is not a talker, and he did not interrupt me one time. Then he asked me to say back to him what I had just described, and when I would not, he described it for me. A man with money quietly buying the instruments that decide whether another man's life work lives or dies, and arranging the conditions and standing where he can be seen when it comes down. I told him it was not the same because Shane Reeves is a criminal and I am not. He said that was true. He said it was also the only part of it that was different, and that in 11 years, nobody in the state of Nebraska had needed to break a law to take everything that man had. I did not like it. I want to be honest that I did not like it, and that for about a minute I was closer to firing him than I have ever been in 31 years. Then I asked him the question that ended the conversation, which I had not planned and which came out of me sideways. I asked him how many people worked at those 9 elevators. He did not know. He said the number was not in the file because it had never been anything the file was for. He said nobody had ever asked him that in 11 years, and he did not think anybody had ever asked anybody. I have gone over that morning a great many times since, and if you have ever found out something about yourself that you could not put back down, I would honestly like to hear about it, because I have not met many people who will say so out loud. We stood in the driveway a while after that. The snow from the day before had not amounted to anything, and there was just a gray line of it along the north side of everything. Then my phone went off in my coat pocket, and it was a number I did not know, out of an exchange down south. I answered it standing there in front of my own garage, with the stone still in my hand. The man on the other end did not give his name at first. He spoke so low that I turned away from the wind and put my other hand over my ear and leaned in to hear him, which I want you to notice because that is what I did. I leaned in. He asked to meet at Mila Coffee's. He named it himself on the telephone and said 10 o'clock on Thursday, and it did not occur to me until I was in the truck the next morning that a man who has never lived in that county should not know where I take my coffee. I got there at 20 minutes to 10. His car was already in the lot. A 9-year-old sedan, clean, parked in the last row. I want to put that down and leave it alone. I am not going to make anything out of it. He was at the corner table with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door, and he stood up when I came in, which nobody does anymore. 63 years old. A canvas coat over a pressed shirt. Hands like a man who worked and then stopped long enough that the calluses went soft, but the shape stayed. Mila brought the pot over, and he thanked her and used her name, and she looked at me on her way back to the register, and I could not read her face. He did not accuse me of anything. That is the part nobody believes when I tell it. For most of an hour, that man talked about the spring of the year he lost everything, the way you would talk about a hailstorm that came through in June. The rate notice came in a windowed envelope in the second week of March. Nobody called him. There is no reason anybody would have. His freight cost went from a number he could carry to one he could not on the same day on every car, and he did the arithmetic at his kitchen table with his wife across from him doing it a second time on her own sheet because she kept the books and was better at it than he was. Their margin on corn out of the Little Blue was 11 cents. The new rate $8.19. He went to Fairbury and sat with his banker who had been to his father's funeral. He said the man was decent about it and gave him 90 days, which was more than the loan committee wanted to give, and that he has never held it against him. He sold the equipment first. The 2 best houses went in June, and the other 7 went with the note in August. The home place had his grandfather's name on the abstract, and it went in the same bundle because it was pledged, and he and his wife moved into a rented house in Superior with a stove that had 2 burners working, and he told me about the stove the same way he told me about the tariff. While he talked, he had a dried cob in his coat pocket, and he took it out and shelled it with his thumb a row at a time, dropping the kernels one at a time on the floor of that restaurant. He did not seem to know he was doing it. Mila saw. She did not say a word about it, and she has thrown men out of there for less. Then he asked whether I remembered who my company bought from at the auction in Fairbury that fall. I did not. I tried. I went back through that year, and what I could bring up was that we picked up 3 houses on a branch line south of us at a good number, and that we scrapped 2 of them the following spring because the legs were shot, and that the railroad pulled the rail off 11 miles of that branch, and I signed the abandonment because we were not using it. That is what was in me. 3 houses at a good number. I could not have told you the name on the sign, and I did not know until that morning that I had stood 3 feet from it at a wedding in my own backyard. He watched me try. He let me get all the way to the end of it. Then he said the only thing that morning with any weight behind it, and he said it in the same voice as the rest. "You don't remember my name. That's the part I can't forgive." He put the cob back in his pocket. He got up and set $2 bills flat on the counter by the register and squared them up with 2 fingers and told Mila to have a good day. Then he stopped beside my chair on his way out, and this was the only part of an hour and 10 minutes that was a threat. He said his daughter-in-law had signed something for the family a good while back, before the second wedding, before any of this, at a time when she had no reason in the world not to. He said I should ask her about it if I wanted, but that I ought to know it was already recorded, and it was already good, and that whatever I thought I was going to do in a boardroom, I was going to be doing it on his paper. Then he went out to the 9-year-old sedan in the last row and drove off south. Mila came around the end of the counter with the rag in her hand and stood there. She did not pick up the $2. She said she had been waiting 30 years to say something to me, and she was going to say it while she still had the nerve. She said that in 30 years she had never once seen me lose my temper. She said that for the first 20 of those years she thought that was strength. Then she picked up the rag and went back around the counter, and she did not tell me what she thinks now, and she has never told me since, and I have not asked. On the second Sunday of November, I was out along the south fence mounding the roses. You do it after the ground has taken a hard freeze and before it takes a harder one. You pull the soil up around the base of each one into a hill about a foot high, and you let the winter have the rest of the cane. It takes me most of an afternoon because there are 11 of them, and I do it with a spade and not a shovel, and I do not hurry it, and I have done it every fall for 29 years, and I have never once let anybody help me. I heard her car come up the drive, and I did not stand up. She had not called. She came around the side of the house in a canvas coat with her work boots on, and she did not say hello either. She sat down on the ground between the 4th bush and the 5th one, right in the dirt with her knees up. She is 31 years old, and I have watched her sit exactly that way since she was 6. She said Nico had not been home since Wednesday. She said Alondra Mays had called her twice and left no message. She said that on Friday at the Juniata house she had weighed in 14 loads, and the day report showed 19, and that she had photographed the day report on her phone before she went home, and that she was not going to pretend anymore that she was imagining it. Then she asked me what I knew and how long I had known it. I have thought about what was in front of me more than anything else in this business. I had a room in Lincoln with 400 pages in it, a forensic accountant, a lawyer, photographs of the inside of bin 14. I could have driven her there in 90 minutes and put the whole thing in her lap, and she would have believed every word because she is my daughter and because it is all true. I told her about the bin. I told her about the probe and the 55 feet and the sweepings up against the door. I told her the receipts on the register did not match what was standing in the steel. I did not say the name Reeves. I did not say the words Little Blue. I did not tell her that 4 years ago, a young man walked up to her at a booth in Lincoln and asked her a question about moisture testing because somebody sent him, and I did not go in the house and get one single piece of paper. Here is why. And it took me until that afternoon to have it clear. 29 years ago, there was a woman who told me she was tired and that it was probably nothing. And I decided for her that it was probably nothing because I had a load booked and because deciding was easier than the other thing. I have spent the rest of my life being the man who decides. I am good at it. And I have never once been able to prove to myself that I am good at it for anybody's sake but my own. I asked her, because I had to, whether she had ever signed anything for her husband's family. She thought about it and said no. She said she had signed the mortgage and the title on her car and a beneficiary form and nothing else in 3 years, and she said it without any hesitation, and I believed her completely. Then she asked the question that mattered. She asked whether I was sure. I could have said yes. Everything I have described to you was already on a table in Lincoln with my name on the lease. What I said to her was that I was not sure. I said the grain was gone, and I was sure of that, and that I did not know yet whose hand was on it, and that I had been wrong once already about who I was looking at. She sat in the dirt with that a while. Up the road, a grain truck went by, and we both listened to it the way people out there do without knowing they are doing it. Then she told me what she was going to do, and she did not ask me whether I thought it was a good idea. She grades on a circuit, 6 houses Tuesday through Friday with a state license and a badge that opens a scale house door at any hour without one person wondering why. She said she would pull the inbound tickets at all 6 against the receipted bushels, 1 house at a time, and inside 2 weeks she would know whether her husband's company was writing paper on corn that was not there. I want to be plain about what my daughter was choosing on the ground in that yard. She had no proof. She had a day report on her phone and a bad feeling. If she was wrong, she had just decided to go through her husband's company behind his back like a thief, and she would have to live in that house afterward knowing she had done it. She picked it up and carried it anyway without any evidence and without me handing her any. And that is the single thing in this whole story I am proudest of, and I had nothing to do with it. She got up and brushed the dirt off the back of her coat. She stood there with the fence at her back and the 11 mounds in a row and looked at me for a second. Then she asked what was in the brown paper box on the seat of my truck that night. I did not answer her. What moved me off the fence was not my daughter, and it was not Shane Reeves. It was a line item. On the Tuesday, Rivka pulled the register again and told me that in the previous 6 days, the company had issued 11 new warehouse receipts against corn that was not in the ground anywhere. 11 more names. It had not stopped for 1 hour while I sat in a rented room being careful. Lila had 4 houses left to walk and needed another week, and I did not have another week, and that is the honest reason I went in when I did. I drove to Lincoln on the Wednesday morning and put the flatbed in a visitor stall on the 2nd level of the garage under a glass building on P Street. The probe stayed behind the seat. I did not think about it. There was no reason to. A man does not carry a 4-foot brass tube into a board meeting. And if you had stopped me in that garage and asked why I was leaving it, I would have looked at you the way you would look at somebody who asked why you were not bringing a spade. I have gone back to that garage in my mind more times than I can tell you. What Shepard had done at 8 that morning took about 9 minutes and 11 years to build. He filed the notice that lifted the veil on the trust. 9 years the register had shown a trustee and a number and no name behind it, and at 8 o'clock on the 12th of November it showed mine, and it showed 71%, and it showed the date I had put it in there. There were 11 people around the long table, the chief financial officer, 4 operating vice presidents, 2 outside directors, 1 a banker out of Grand Island I had done business with in another life, who did not recognize me at all, a woman from Human Resources taking notes, Alondra Mays in gray at the far corner, present as counsel, with nothing in front of her but a legal pad and a pen laid flat across it. Nico Reeves was not in that room. He was on a call from Chicago, which is what I was told and have never confirmed. The chief executive officer of a grain company was not at the emergency meeting of his own board, and his father's lawyer was. Clark Mayer chairs that board. 67 ran 2 co-ops and a fertilizer company, not a crook, and he calls every man in a room by his last name, including men he has known 20 years. He had met me twice, both times introduced as a representative of the majority holder, and had shaken my hand and not thought about it again. Shepard said it in 4 sentences, with no color on it at all. The trust had been lifted. The holder of 71% of the common was in the room. The holder was the founder, and the founder was me. And I had been out there in a flatbed truck since the spring of 2016. I have never seen a room do what that room did. One of the operating men laughed 1 short syllable before he understood he was the only one. A vice president I promoted in 1998 put both hands flat on the table. The banker from Grand Island took out his telephone, looked something up, and then looked at me over the top of it with his mouth a little open. The chief financial officer went the color of the table. Alondra Mays did not move at all. She did not write anything down, and she did not reach for the pen. I did not explain myself to them. I have never been able to stand the sound of a man explaining why he has money. I told them 3 things I wanted, and I told them in the order they mattered. Suspend all executive authority effective immediately. Halt the issuance of every warehouse receipt company-wide as of that hour at every one of the 34 houses. Freeze the Treasury against any outbound transfer over $10,000 without 2 signatures and one of them mine. Then the chief financial officer asked me why, and I could not tell him. That is the thing I had walked in there knowing and had not solved. If I told 11 people in a room that there were 2.3 million bushels missing, one of them would tell his wife, and one of them would tell his lawyer, and inside 48 hours it would be in front of the Public Service Commission. And then the gates come down on 3,206 people in the middle of a harvest they had already hauled. So I sat there and asked a board of directors to hand me their company on my word, and I gave them nothing. And I watched them look at each other, and I did not blame a single one of them. Clark Mayer did not argue. That is what I was not ready for. He heard the whole thing out, and then he said that he had no interest in standing between a majority holder and his own property, that my rights were my rights, that he had spent 40 years watching men get in the way of that, and it had never once come to any good. Then he said there was one thing he had to raise, and he was sorry about the timing of it. He reached down beside his chair and brought up a black binder with a year on the spine, and he opened it to a page that already had a tab on it, and he turned it around on the table so it faced me. He said there was a provision. The page had a tab on it and a paragraph number and about 11 lines of type, and it had been sitting in that binder since the spring of 2019. It was a control review provision. If a holder who has not been of record comes forward and asserts control of the company, any shareholder of 2% or more may demand a review, and while that review is pending, executive authority stays where it is, and the asserting holder gets nothing. 90 days for the arbitrator, 90 days in which the board keeps running the company exactly the way it has been running it. Clark Mayer had put that on the table himself. He told me so before I asked him. In 2018, there was a co-op up by Aurora that a man took apart over about 14 months by buying quiet and coming out all at once. And Clark had been on that board and had watched 300 farmers get told about it in a rented hall. He came back and said it would not happen to us. He wrote a motion. It carried 9-1. It is a good provision. If a stranger had walked into that room instead of me, that paragraph would have saved this company. I asked him where the idea came from. He said he had talked it through with a fellow over a couple of years, a consultant he had met at a state association thing in Kearney. He said the man had been on the wrong end of a bad deal once and knew the ground that they had lunch 2 or 3 times a year and that the man never charged him a nickel. He could not come up with the name. He is 67 and meets 400 people a year, and he had no more reason to hold on to that name than I had to hold on to a name at an auction in Fairbury. That is what I want you to understand about Shane Reeves, and it is why I have never once been able to describe him to anybody as a criminal and leave it there. He did not bribe Clark Mayer. He did not have anything on him. He found an honest man who had just watched something bad happen, and he agreed with him patiently twice a year for 2 years, until the honest man went and did a good thing for good reasons that would sit in a binder for 6 years and open under my hand. Alondra Mays stood up at the far corner. She picked her pen up off the legal pad, and she set it down flat, and then she said she was appearing on behalf of a shareholder of record holding 4.1% of the common under an irrevocable proxy, and that her client demanded review. I asked, whose proxy? She turned it around on the table the same way Clark had. Voting agreement and irrevocable proxy. 4 pages, notarized, recorded with the county on the same day it was signed, which is not required, and which tells you the whole thing by itself. And at the bottom of the 4th page, in the handwriting I have watched form since it was crayon, my daughter's name. The date on it was 4 years old. It came out of the closing on their house. 40-some pages at a title company table in Kearney, a young woman turning them and saying initial here, sign here, and page 31. Was not about a house at all. Alondra Mays was counsel of record on that file. Lila signed it between a flood certification and an escrow form. 3 days before that meeting, I stood in my own yard with a spade in my hand and asked my daughter whether she had ever signed anything for that family. She thought about it. She said the mortgage, the title on her car, and a beneficiary form. She told me the exact truth. It was in the mortgage. It had been in the mortgage the entire time. 4 years sitting in a fireproof box in Kearney, and recorded down at the courthouse, where anybody in the world could have gone and read it, including me. The arbitrator was appointed the following Monday. Executive authority stayed with the board. The receipts were not halted because halting them was an executive act. The treasury was not frozen. I got nothing that day but my name back on a piece of paper. And my name was the one thing in this business I had never wanted. 90 days. I sat there and did the arithmetic on 90 days while 11 people gathered up their folders, and it came out to the middle of February, and I thought about a man in Fairbury sitting across from a banker who had been to his father's funeral, and I understood that the number had not been chosen out of the air. I went down the elevator and out into the second level of that garage. It is a low ceiling down there, with pipe painted yellow running along it, and a light is that green color that never comes all the way on. My truck was in the visitor's stall where I had left it, third from the end. I got in and shut the door and sat there. Then I reached back behind the seat without thinking about it, the way your hand goes to a thing, and my fingers found the brass and closed on it, and I laid it across my knees in the dark of that garage. 4 feet of worn tube with an edge on it I had put there myself at 3 in the morning for no reason on this earth. It was cold. It had been in the truck the whole time I was upstairs. I sat with it on my lap for a long time and did not start the engine. 2 days after the board meeting, my daughter came in my back door without knocking and put a stack of paper on the kitchen table 2 inches thick. It was scale tickets. 41 of them she had been running off the copier at her own house since the first week of September, 2 at a time, on days when nobody was watching. The rest were from the circuit. She had walked all 6 houses in 11 days instead of 14, pulling the pit tickets for every load that had crossed a scale since the middle of August and matching them against the day report that went to Lincoln that night. She had done it in a spiral notebook in pencil in 2 columns in her own hand. Weighed, reported, line after line, page after page for 11 days. Here is why that stack mattered more than everything Rivka Melton had. Rivka had the register and I had the bins. Between the 2 of us, we could prove that corn was gone. What we could not prove was that anybody had done it on purpose. A missing bushel does not have a motive. A scale ticket does. Every load in this state gets weighed twice and printed at the pit, and that printout is the closest thing to a fact that exists in this business, and my daughter had 400 of them showing one number against 400-day reports showing another. The gap was never random, and it was never small, and it never went the other way. Rivka came out from Lincoln the next morning and worked at my table until dark, with Lila sitting across from her. By the middle of the afternoon, she had the thing that took it out of the realm of argument. Every one of those day reports had been electronically approved before it uploaded. The system stamps a user credential on the approval, and there is no way to submit without one. They were all approved under the same credential, all of them at every house, including houses 80 miles apart, on the same evening. The credential belonged to Danny Connor. He came to my house at 7 the next morning, and nobody had called him. He had heard Lila was pulling tickets and put it together himself, and he drove over and stood in my kitchen with his cap in his hand and told me the rest of what he had left out in front of bin 14. He found it in February. Not just the sound of the steel. He had gone into the terminal at the Juniata house to fix a printer and pulled up the approval log and seen his own name on reports he had never touched, going back months. He said he sat in that chair a while and thought about who he would tell and what it would sound like. A superintendent walks into Lincoln and says somebody has been using my login to falsify the numbers on my own house. He said he could hear how that lands. He had no way on earth to prove he had not done it, and he was 14 months from 30 years, and his wife has a condition they insure through the company, and if nobody believed him, he was 58 with a fraud allegation on him and no coverage. So he said nothing, and he stopped walking the East Row. And every month after that, it got harder to say something rather than easier, which is how that works, and everybody knows it. Then he asked Rivka for a pen and signed a sworn statement laying all of it out, and he signed it before anybody had told him what would happen to him afterward, and he did not ask. I want to say what happened to me at my own table that morning. I had spent 24 days running this thing. I picked the lawyer I picked, the accountant I decided, who got told what, I decided to sit on it, I decided when to walk into that boardroom, and the last one cost me the company. Sitting there, watching a grain grader and a superintendent build the case out of paper I had never seen, I understood I was not running anything anymore. What I have never been able to explain to anybody is that it did not feel like losing. I have gone over that, and I am still not comfortable with what it says about the 30 years before it. We drove to Omaha on the Monday, the three of us and Shepard, and put it in front of a woman named Inoa Cochran in a room on the 4th floor with no window in it. She is 46. She has spent 9 years on warehouse receipt fraud in 4 states, and she has the manner of somebody who has been lied to professionally for a long time and has stopped taking it personally. She read for 2 hours and did not ask one question while she read. She did not tell us it was a good case, and she did not tell us it was a bad one. When she finished, she squared the stack up and looked at Danny Connor a second longer than she looked at anybody else, and then she asked the only thing she asked all day. Who else knows? We told her. Then Shepard told her about the annual meeting, the one this company has held the first week of December every year since I started it, where the audited numbers go in front of the shareholders and the lenders and about 140 of the biggest producers we buy from. 200 people in a hotel ballroom in Lincoln. 9 days out. She wrote the date down. She said she would be there. She did not say what she would be doing, and I did not ask her, and she did not offer. The annual meeting is the first Thursday in December, and it has been the first Thursday in December since 1994. It runs in a hotel ballroom on the west side of Lincoln, with 140 producers, our lenders, the outside directors, and every shareholder who cares to come. Prime rib, a cash bar nobody uses much because most of them are driving home. The audited numbers go up on the screen, and the chief executive walks the room through the year. I did not go in at 7. I sat out in the lot in the flatbed, with the heater running, and watched the windows fog up. And at 10 after, when I knew he would be into the second half of it, I got out. I left the folder on the seat. I want that on the record because of what I did the last time. Rivka's binder was in the truck, Danny's sworn statement was in the truck. 400 pages of register were in the truck, and I walked across that lot in 11 degrees carrying one thing. I carried the probe. 200 people watch the door of a room like that without knowing they are watching it. What they saw come through it was a 68-year-old man in the second suit he has ever owned, with 4 feet of brass in his hand, and the sound of that room did not stop all at once. It went out in a ring, table by table, the way a stone goes out in water. And by the time I was a third of the way up the aisle, the only voice left in the building was coming out of the speakers. Nico Reeves was at the podium with a slide up behind him showing the carry position by region. He got about 4 words further, and then he did not. Clark Mayer stood up at the head table. He did not call for security, and he did not tell me to sit down. He said to the room, and not to me, that under Article 4, any shareholder of record may address the annual meeting, and that the chair recognized me for 3 minutes. I have thought a great deal about why nobody stopped me. I had no executive authority and no control of that company. An arbitrator in Omaha was sitting on my 71% until the middle of February. I had one thing left, which was a right, and a right is not power. Any of those directors could have moved to adjourn. Clark Mayer could have ruled me out of order. Nobody did, and I will not pretend I understand it, except that a room will let a man speak if it can tell he does not think he is going to be believed. I did not go up on the platform. I stopped at the front of the floor where the tables start, and I turned around, so I was looking at them and not at the screen. I told them what I had in my hand. It is a probe. You put it down through the roof hatch and pull a core, and look at what comes out, and it is not changed in 100 years because there is nothing to improve about it. I told them that 11 days after my daughter's wedding, I put that tube into bin 14 at the Juniata house, and it went its whole length and swung in air, and that the plumb line said 55 feet and 4 inches of nothing where there should have been 4, and that the corn against the door was not corn. Then I told them I was not going to show them a document. I said there was a binder in my truck and they were welcome to it afterward, and I did not want them to look at it tonight. Because a binder is a thing a man makes, and a bin is not. The Juniata house is 91 miles from that hotel. I said so. I said it was 11 degrees and the wind was out of the northwest, and that anybody who wanted to could get in his own vehicle right now tonight in what he had on and be standing at the base of that bin by 9 o'clock. The ground level door has a pin latch and anybody can work it. I said I would ride along with whoever would have me and would not touch anything, and that if the bin was full, I would say so into a microphone in that same room next year. Then I quit talking. And it was very quiet, and I want to be honest about how long that lasted because it was long enough that I understood I might have just finished my life's work standing in a ballroom holding a piece of pipe. Nico did the only thing he had. He came off the podium a step and said in a warm voice that we all had enormous respect for the founder, and that there were reconciliation matters under review, and that this was not the forum. He said the word forum. 200 people who load trucks and sign notes and worry about basis heard a man in a good suit say the word forum. Then a man at table 9 stood up. His name is Wendell Boma. He is 51, and he bought his father out in 2009, and he has been behind ever since. And he had 81,000 bushels on receipt at Juniata, which was every dollar he had in the world. He did not say anything to anybody. He put his napkin on his chair and started for the doors. The Kasbauer brothers went next, out of 2 different tables on 2 different sides of that room, and they have not spoken to each other since 2014, and they went out the same door about 4 feet apart. The room was coming apart along the seams by then. People were turning in their chairs to watch 3 men leave and turning back to see what the head table was going to do about it. And there was that low, rolling noise a crowd makes right before it decides something. Then my daughter stood up at a table halfway back. I did not know she was in the building. She had not told me she was coming, and I would have talked her out of it. She had been on the pit at Fairfield until 4 that afternoon, and she came the way she was in a good wool coat over a flannel shirt with her boots on, and she walked up that center aisle past 140 men who buy and sell corn for a living, and every one of them knew exactly what she was. She stopped beside me, not behind me. I want that put down plainly because I have thought about it every day since. There was room on my left and she took it, and she stood square, and the 2 of us were facing that room shoulder to shoulder, and I have never in my life been given anything like it. My name is Lila Hendricks. I am a licensed grain grader, and I weighed most of what is in this room's numbers. Then she read out of a spiral notebook. She did not accuse anybody of anything. She read 2 columns, weighed and reported. Juniata, the 18th of September, 4 loads. 22,400 bushels, weighed 29,100, reported. Fairfield, the 2nd of October, Byron, the 21st, 6 loads, 31,000, weighed, and 38,200, reported. Ruskin, the 9th of November. She went house by house and date by date in that flat voice people use for reading numbers out loud, and she did it for a long time, and nobody in that ballroom moved. You could see them doing the arithmetic. That is the thing about a room full of producers. Every man in there has a pencil in his head, and by the 4th date, they were not listening to my daughter anymore, they were adding, and by the 7th, they had it. Then a voice came from the back of the room, from over by the service doors, and it was Danny Connor. He had been standing back there the whole night, and I had not seen him. He came up that aisle in insulated coveralls with the company name over the pocket, and he was the only man in that building not in a suit, and he took his cap off about 10 feet from the front and held it in both hands the rest of the time. He is 58 years old. He had not slept. He said he was the superintendent at Juniata and had been for 30 years less 14 months. Then he went through it shift by shift. He said who was on the pit the night of the 18th of September, and who ran the second shift, and who locked up. First names men he has worked beside for 20 years, and he said it the way an old man says a rosary, and none of those men had done one thing wrong, and he named every one of them so that nobody in that room could put it on the wrong shoulders. Then he said the approvals on all of it came in under his own credential. He said he had found that out in February. He said he had not told anybody for 8 months because he could not prove he had not done it, and because he was 14 months from his pension and his wife is sick. He said that in front of 200 people who will still be in the grain business when he is not, and he did not soften it, and it was the bravest thing I have ever watched a man do standing still. I looked at the podium then. Nico Reeves had not moved through any of it. He had one hand on the lectern and the other one down at his side, and there was sweat coming through at his collar in a room that was maybe 68 degrees. He was not looking at my daughter. He was not looking at Danny. He had his head turned to his right and slightly up toward the back corner of that ballroom, past the last table where the chairs run out. I followed it. Shane Reeves was standing along the back wall in a canvas coat with his hands at his sides. I had not seen him come in. He was not looking at the podium. He was not looking at me either, and I had expected that he would be. He had his eyes on the double doors at the back of the room, and then he looked down at his wrist and he checked the time. And he put his arm back down.
That is what I want you to have out of this if you take one thing. Everything that happened in that ballroom over the next hour, and everything that happened in the 4 months after it, and the whole of what became of that family was already finished in the 2 seconds it took a man to look at his watch while his son stood up there sweating.
Nico watched him do it. He was 34 years old, and he had a room and a microphone and a father, and he watched his father check the time. The doors at the back opened then, and it was not Shane Reeves going out. It was a woman coming in a plain coat with 2 men behind her who did not sit down. And she stopped just inside and stood there with her hands folded and did not come any further and waited. Nobody was arrested in that ballroom. I have had to explain that 100 times since because everyone wants the handcuffs in the room with the chandeliers. Inoa Cochran walked up to Nico Reeves at the side of the platform, said about 9 words to him, and he went with her at 11 at night in his own car and sat down in a room in Omaha and talked until 4:15. I was not there. I read the transcript 9 weeks later at a table in Shepard's office, and there is one thing in this that is not in the transcript, which Inoa told me herself, and I will get to it. He held for about 4 hours. He was better at it than I expected, and he had answers ready for the tickets and the credential and the receipts, and none of them were good, but all of them took time. It was not the evidence that took him apart. They had shown him the evidence at midnight, and he had sat right up under it. At 2:10, she asked him whose idea the marital authorization had been. He said his father's. She asked him when his father had first mentioned the name Lila Hendricks to him. You can see him doing the arithmetic on the page. There are 4 lines where he is talking about the grain show in Lincoln, the booth, the moisture question, and then a stretch of blank where the recorder noted the time. Then he asked whether they could go back over the dates. She read them to him. He asked her to read them again. His father had said her name 11 weeks before he ever laid eyes on her. He gave them everything after that. The shell, the intermediary, the 2 men on the pit who were paid the way the approvals were done, the whole of it, in under 2 hours, and he did not ask for a lawyer until nearly 5. Here is what is not in the transcript. Sometime near the end, he asked Inoa Cochran whether his father had said anything about him. She told me she said no, because it was true. She said he sat there a second, and then he said, "All right," and then he kept going. Shane Reeves came to my house 2 days later. He drove up alone at about 8 in the morning and knocked on the front door, which nobody does, and stood on the step with his hands out of his pockets so I could see them. I let him in. He did not look any different than he had at Mila's. He said he expected to be charged inside the month and that his lawyer had told him not to be within 100 miles of me. He said the arbitration would be withdrawn by the end of the week. He said it the way you would report a fence down. I put the pot on. I do not entirely know why. He had not asked for anything, and I did not owe him anything, and he sat down at my kitchen table without being told to, and I got a second cup down and poured it and set it in front of him, and he wrapped both hands around it. Neither one of us apologized to the other one that morning. He did not offer, and I did not either. I want that plain because people hear this and they want the part where two old men forgive each other, and it did not happen, and I do not believe now that it was available to us. What I did was tell him a number. I said 142. He did not know what it was. I told him. That is how many people were on the payroll at the 9 houses in the last full year before they closed. 14 at Ruskin, 9 at Byron, 26 at Endicott because of the feed side. I went down there in the second week of February and sat in the assessor's office in Fairbury, and then a school district office in Hebron, and then the front room of a woman in Alexandria who had kept her husband's papers, and I put it together over 4 days. And nobody asked me to, and there was no use for it. There was no line on a court filing for it. I could not stand any longer that the number did not exist anywhere. He looked at the table for a while. Then he said he had known most of them by name. He drank about half of that cup and stood up and thanked me for it and went out to his car and drove south, and that is the last time I have ever been in a room with him. I went out to the truck maybe 20 minutes after. There was something I meant to go do. I no longer remember what, some bin somewhere. I got in and reached back behind the seat for the probe the way I have reached back for it 10,000 times. My hand would not close on it. I got hold of it, and it went right out of my fingers and rang off the door sill and dropped in the footwell. I picked it up with both hands, and it went again. I sat there in my own driveway with my 2 hands out in front of me and watched them do that. On a job I have done since before my wife was sick, and there was nobody in the yard and nobody to see it, and I am glad of that. I left it in the footwell. I did not go anywhere. I sat in that truck with the engine off until the windshield went over gray from the inside, and I could not see the road anymore. I did not follow what became of that family. I want to be exact about this. I did not call anybody to ask, and I did not read the coverage in the Lincoln paper past the first week, and the arraignments and the counts and the plea agreements are all in the record, and anybody can go look them up. What I actually know about the 6 months after that ballroom, I know from 4 things that came into my hands. The first is a form. In the 3rd week of April, I drove to the county facility in Sarpy, where Nico Reeves was being held after the court took his release back. I do not entirely know why I went. I sat in that lot for a while, and then went in as far as the front counter, and there is a clipboard there with visitor request slips on it, and I filled one out. Name, relationship, inmate. I got to relationship and put down father-in-law, which took me longer than the rest of it together. While I was standing there, the deputy had the log up on his screen turned half toward the counter, and I could see the column, and I did the arithmetic without meaning to. He had been in there 137 days. There was nothing in that column, not his mother. I folded the slip in half and put it in my coat and walked back out to the truck, and it is still in the back of the notebook behind the elastic where the check used to be. The second is an envelope. The receiver appointed over Little Blue Holdings sent certified mail to Shane and Bailey Reeves at the house in Kearney. And because Shepard was on the service list, a copy came back through his office, and it came back to us with a yellow sticker on it. Forwarded. There is a new address printed on that sticker in small type, and I have looked at it more times than I can defend. It is on 25th Street in Kearney, above a laundromat that I have driven past 400 times in my life without ever once looking up at the second floor. 2 rooms. I know it is 2 rooms because I finally did drive by and count the windows, which is not something I am proud of and which I am telling you anyway. The third is a sale bill. They still mail them out there. A single folded sheet farm equipment and household consignment auction at the fairgrounds in Superior, and it came to my box in March because I've been on that mailing list since 1986, and nobody ever takes a man off. I read them the way other men read the sports page. Lot 212 was a brass national cash register circa 1920, working with the original drawer, and underneath it, in the small print, it said, "Out of the Reeves elevator office." It went for $950 to a man who runs an antique place in Red Cloud. His wife had kept that thing in a garage for 11 years through everything else they sold, and it was the last piece of it. And when it went, there was no longer any object anywhere in the world with that company's name on it. The fourth is a letter. Bailey Reeves wrote to me at the end of May. 3 pages, both sides in pen. I am not going to reproduce it, and I have not shown it to my daughter. It is not an apology, and it does not ask me for anything. And I would like to be able to tell you it is unhinged, and it is not. It is a very careful accounting of whose fault this was laid out in order with dates. She knew about the elevators. She did the books for that company for 19 years, and she knew what a tariff schedule was before I did. She did not know about the receipts, and the way she writes it, I believe her, and she spends most of the second page on the difference between those two things, which is a difference I understand better than she thinks I do. Then on the third page, she gets to her husband, and she does not raise her voice on paper any more than he does out loud, and it is the coldest thing I have ever read. That is all 4. A form I did not turn in, an envelope that got forwarded, a lot number in a sale bill, and a letter I have not answered. Here is what I want to say about it, and it is the only reason I have told you any of this. I thought I would feel something. I had it pictured, and I had had it pictured since the parking lot, since before I knew there was a bin involved at all. Not gloating, I would like to think I was never quite that. But something clean, some settling in the chest. The thing a man is supposed to get at the end that the whole rest of it is supposed to be paid out in. I have thought about that ballroom, and that 90 days, and that check on the 25th of October. And I have sat with all 4 of those objects on the kitchen table at the same time, which I did once in June on a Sunday. Nothing came. Not one thing. I sat there and looked at a form and an envelope and a piece of newsprint and 3 pages of a woman's handwriting, and what was in that room was the same thing that had been in it before any of them arrived, which was a man, 68 years old, at a table by himself in a house nobody else lives in. The roses broke the 3rd week of April the way they do. 11 of them along that south fence, red at the tips of the canes first, and then the little furled leaves, and I had the mounds pulled off the crowns by the 15th because it was an early spring. That is a year and a half after the parking lot. I will tell you where everything landed, and then I will stop. The arbitration was withdrawn in December, and the 71% came back to me in January. I covered the receipts, all 2.3 million bushels of them out of what I had before the commission ever opened a file, and 3,206 people got paid what their paper said, and most never knew there had been a question. That is not generosity. That is a man paying for a thing that happened on his watch, and I would like it left there. Danny Connor got his 30 years. He is still at Juniata, and will be until he does not want to be. And we have not once discussed February or the login or that morning at the base of bin 14. Shepard Chung wrote out his own resignation in January and put it on my desk, and I did not accept it, and he has not brought it up either. Lila's divorce was final in March. She turned down a desk in Lincoln twice. She came out that Saturday afternoon, and we sat in the 2 wooden chairs at the end of the yard where the sun holds longest. That is the ground where she got married the first time, under those bushes, with 19 people standing on it. We did not talk much. We have gotten better at that. After a while, she asked me again what was in the brown paper box. She had asked twice before, once in that yard in November with the canes bare, and once at Christmas, and both times I let it go by. I went in the house and got it out of the bottom of my closet where it had been for 18 months, still wrapped, too much tape on the corners, and I put it in her lap. It is a brass test kettle, a quart cup and a strike-off stick, the kind a grader uses to run test weight, which she does 40 times a day and has done since she was 22. They are not made in brass anymore to speak of. I had it made in July by a fellow in Iowa because she had passed her advanced certification in June and told me on the telephone in about 11 words the way she tells me things. It has her name on it. Lila Hendricks, not the other one. I would like to tell you that I did not think about that when I gave the engraver the name 3 months before that wedding. I did think about it. I have gone back and forth on whether that was a decent thing to do, and I have not settled it, and I am not going to pretend to you that I have. She sat with it in her lap for a while and turned the strike-off over a couple of times. Then she asked me why I did not just mail it. I told her the truth, which is that I wanted to hand it to her in front of 800 people. That is the whole thing if you want it in one sentence. I spent 29 years telling myself that if I was strong enough and if I owned enough, nobody would be taken out of my hands again. That is what the trust was. That is what 34 elevators were. That is what a man is doing when he stands in a driveway at 8 in the morning, telling his lawyer how he means to take a family apart in public. And what it came down to was that I wanted to be seen handing my daughter a brass cup. Being there is not a thing you can buy, and it is not a thing you can win. It has to be done again every day, in the ordinary way, and nobody watches you do it, and there is no ceremony. I did not know that at 68. I am not sure I know it now. I know I have to keep getting up and doing it. She heard me cough about 4 o'clock. She has heard it before, and she has never said anything, and that day she said something. I told her I had an appointment in Omaha in May. That is all I told her, and it is all she asked, and she nodded and looked out at the fence. Then I got up and went to the truck and got the probe out of the footwell where it has ridden since that February morning, and I brought it back and held it out to her. 4 feet of brass worn through in the middle where a hand goes. 41 years of a hand going there. A stone edge on the taper that no bin on earth ever needed. It is worth about $90, and there is not enough money on earth to buy it. She took it. She stood up out of the chair with it and got her hands set on it the way you do one high and one low, and she looked at where they were, and then she looked at me. "Show me how you hold it." So I showed her. We stood in the grass at the end of the yard, with the roses coming in behind us and the light going long across the stubble, and I put my hands over my daughter's hands on that tube and moved them about an inch, which is all it was, and that is where I am going to leave it. There is one more thing I do now that I did not do before, and it is not much. Every year on the 22nd of August, I drive the Little Blue. Not to the towns. I take the county roads along the bottom ground where the 9 houses stood, and 4 are still standing empty, and the rest are concrete pads with weeds in the cracks, and I drive it at 35 and I do not stop and I do not get out. It takes a little under 3 hours. I did it the first time because I could not think of anything else to do with the number 142, and I have done it every year since, and I expect I will do it until I cannot drive. I am not asking anybody to call that penance. It does not fix one thing. Nobody down there knows I do it, and I would not want them to. Here is what I have got, and it is all I have got. A man keeps 2 ledgers. There is the one everybody can see, where you put down what you built and what you paid and who you fed. I filled mine. It is a good ledger, and I am not going to apologize for it. Then there is the other one, and on that one, you write what your good day cost somebody you never met. Most of us never open the second book. No law says you have to. Nothing bad happens if you leave it shut, and the world will call you an honest man your whole life, with that book closed on the shelf. But you do not get to keep the first ledger and call the second one somebody else's business. That is the part I had wrong for 29 years. When it came back around on me, I wanted to stand up and say, "This is unjust," and I found out I had spent my life spending down the right to say it. You cannot collect on a thing like that. You can only pay on it. And the paying is done in small, ordinary ways nobody applauds. At a kitchen table on a county road in August, in the 2 minutes it takes to put your hands over somebody else's hands and move them an inch. If any of that landed on you, do me a favor and say so in the comments, because I would like to know how many of us are carrying the second book around. And if you have got somebody you have been meaning to be in the room with, quit listening to me and go be in the room with them.